So, uh, I want you to imagine for a second that the floor has just completely dropped out from under you. Like you were going through the absolute worst crisis of your life.
Right, the real bottom of the barrel stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's, I don't know, financial ruin. Maybe it's a terrible health diagnosis or a loss so deep you can't even see the bottom of it.
Hmm.
Now, usually in a moment like that, most of us have some kind of safe harbor, a person, a physical place, or, for a lot of people, a faith,
Hmm.
a God that they turn to for comfort.
Right, that's the baseline human reaction. When the storm hits, you run for the shelter.
Exactly. But here's the big question that's driving our deep dive today.
Yeah.
What happens when you run to that shelter and you find the door locked?
Yeah.
Or worse, what happens when you start to suspect that the person running the shelter is actually the one who sent the storm in the first place?
Wow, yeah. You are describing a really profound type of isolation there. It's a closed loop where the only potential cure for your pain feels like the actual cause of your pain.
Yes. And that is exactly the messy, uncomfortable, and frankly, just fascinating territory we are exploring today. We're unpacking chapter 3 of the book, Writing the Ways of Grief by Daniel Astoria.
A heavy read, for sure.
It is heavy. And I have to say, when I first picked this up, I expected a pretty standard, grief book.
Yeah.
The usual 5 stages, it gets better, time heals all wounds kind of thing.
And instead, you got a full-on theological wrestling match.
A wrestling match is putting it lightly. I mean, this chapter is a brawl. It's titled The Comfort Paradox. And it explores why we get angry at God, why we make these little deals with the universe, and this is key, why losing a business feels fundamentally different than losing a spouse.
It really is a distinct piece of writing because it completely refuses to offer those easy platitudes.
No quick fixes here.
Right. A story isn't interested in making you feel better quickly. He wants to understand the actual mechanics of despair. He looks at the psychology of why we believe and, probably more importantly, why we stop believing when things go terribly wrong.
Let's start right there with that stopping believing part. Because right out of the gate, Astoria throws a punch at the whole concept of atheism. And it's a little controversial.
It is, yeah. He argues that a very large minority of people who call themselves atheists didn't actually get there through science or philosophy.
Right. They didn't just read Richard Dawkins and suddenly decide, the math doesn't add up.
Exactly. He suggests their atheism is actually a direct reaction to anger.
It's the I'm not talking to you anymore version of atheism.
In a way, yes. I mean, think about the logic he lays out for us. You go through a massive tragedy, and your first thought is, how could a loving God allow this?
Right.
Which then steps to, just God wouldn't allow this. And the only way to resolve that cognitive dissonance, the only way to stop feeling so utterly betrayed, is to conclude, therefore, he must not exist.
It's almost a protective measure, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Because if God doesn't exist, then he didn't hurt me. It's just random bad luck. The universe is just chaotic. And sure, that's scary, but it's not personal.
That is the key distinction right there. If it's random, it's not personal. If there is a God, and he just sat there and let this happen, it feels like a targeted attack.
Yeah.
Astoria is really highlighting that for a lot of people, atheism acts as an emotional shield. It's actually easier to live in a cold, empty universe than in a universe ruled by a father who just ignores you.
Which is such a striking way to put it.
Now, he does clarify, and we should definitely clarify this too, that he's not talking about all atheists here.
Oh, absolutely not. There are plenty of people who just intellectually don't buy the God hypothesis.
Yeah.
Purely logical disbelief.
Right. But Astoria isn't talking about them. He's talking strictly about the wounded believer who walks away. And he knows this territory so well because he lived it. He actually talks about his own, tantrums with God.
I loved his honesty here.
Yeah.
He doesn't paint himself as this pious, noble sufferer. He straight up calls himself a spoiled child.
That spoiled child metaphor is so crucial to understanding the first half of his crisis. We really have to look at where he was in life at that point. He was a successful guy. He had a deal with God, or at least he totally thought he did.
Oh, the deal. I think we all have this, whether we're conscious of it or not. It's that transactional faith.
Yep.
The idea of, I'm a good person, I donate to charity, I don't kick puppies, therefore my car shouldn't break down and my business should thrive.
It's the classic human craving for a meritocracy. We want the universe to operate on a coins in, soda out basis.
Exactly. A cosmic vending machine.
Right. And Astoria describes a time when he put, as he says, everything on the line for what he truly thought was a divine calling. He risked his business, his office, his entire financial security, fully believing that because he was doing it for God, God was somehow obligated to secure the outcome.
He practically says that out loud.
Yeah.
He shares this internal monologue where he's just screaming, "Why bother doing anything for you if you're not going to watch my back?"
And that's the exact moment the transaction fails. When he faces the actual loss of his office and his business, he feels cheated. He feels like he held up his end of the contract and God breached it.
But then he flips the perspective. And this is where that spoiled child image really, really lands. He imagines himself screaming at the sky. And he imagines God just standing there, nodding patiently, like a parent dealing with a toddler who is completely melting down because they can't eat a battery.
Yes. It's a total shift in power dynamics. I mean, the toddler screams because they lack context. They don't know the battery will kill them. They just know it looks shiny and they want it right now.
Right.
The parent says no, not of cruelty, but out of a vastly superior understanding of reality. Astoria realizes that in his anger about his business, he was just a toddler lacking the whole picture.
And speaking of the whole picture, this leads to probably the most unexpected reference in the entire book, Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
I mean, I did not have musical theater on my bingo card for a heavy theology discussion, but here we are.
It's a brilliant pivot, though, when you think about it.
Right.
It anchors all this abstract theology in something deeply cultural and historical.
So set the scene for us. Why on earth is he thinking about Tevi the milkman while he's standing there losing his office?
Well, he's standing there, finally realizing the bailout isn't coming. God isn't going to just write a check to save the business. And suddenly he remembers the scene where the Jewish people are being forced out of Anatevka.
The pogrom.
Right. They are losing their homes, their history, literally everything. And one of the villagers turns to the rabbi and asks, wouldn't this be a good time for the Messiah to come?
Which is basically the polite way of saying, hey, we are literally being destroyed here.
Right.
A little supernatural help would be really nice right about now.
Exactly. And the rabbi just says, we'll have to wait for him somewhere else.
Oof.
And that line hit Astoria like a sledgehammer. Because here is a fictional representation of a very, very real history. Generations of faithful people, prophets, missionaries, entire populations have faced ruin, exile, and death. And the rescue just didn't come.
It's a massive reality check. I mean, he's standing there mourning his office furniture and his commercial lease, and he suddenly realizes he's part of a history of human suffering that is so much bigger than him.
It completely decenters him. He goes from, why is this happening to me, to, who am I to think I get a pass?
Right.
If the apostles weren't saved from execution, why should Daniel Astoria be saved from bankruptcy?
That realization seems to completely cure his anger about the business. But then he takes it a step further with what he calls the Messiah misunderstanding. And this was the part that genuinely made me go, oh, wow. He connects his own anger to the reason people rejected Jesus in the first century.
This is the historical bridge he builds. Astoria argues that the Jewish people in the first century were desperate. They were living under Roman occupation. It was brutal, oppressive. So when they prayed for a Messiah, they weren't asking for a gentle spiritual teacher. They're asking for a general. They wanted someone to kick down the doors, drive out the Romans, and reestablish the earthly kingdom of Israel right then and there.
They wanted a change in circumstances. They wanted their business saved, to use the story's metaphor.
Precisely. They wanted political liberation. Then Jesus shows up and offers spiritual liberation. He talks about the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of Judea. And the people reject him because he's answering a question they didn't even ask.
They wanted a fix for their pain, but he offered a fix for their souls.
Yes. And Astoria realizes that's exactly what he was doing in his own life. He was rejecting God because God was offering him a spiritual lesson in humility and trust, but he just wanted to keep his office.
He was mad because God wasn't the genie he wanted him to be.
Exactly. And once he realized that, once he saw that his anger was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what God actually promises, the anger about the business just evaporated. He could accept losing the office because he realized the deal he thought he had was never real in the first place.
So that resolves the business crisis. He moves past that spoiled child phase. And honestly, if the chapter ended there, it would be this nice, tidy little lesson about letting go of material things.
Yeah, but it doesn't end there.
No, it takes a very, very dark turn. We have to talk about Natalie. Because the source material shifts from the loss of a career to the death of his wife. And the way the story describes this, the temperature in the room just drops.
It has to, because the spoiled child analogy works perfectly when you're denied a toy or a business deal. It absolutely does not work when you are standing at a graveside.
Not at all.
Astoria is very careful to distinguish between these two experiences. He says losing the business brought anger, losing Natalie brought despair.
What is the functional difference there in his view? I mean, they both feel terrible. But why does he separate them so sharply?
Because anger is active. It's high energy. You're shouting, you're fighting, you're trying to negotiate, you're still engaging with God, even if it's just to yell at him.
Right, you still think there's a conversation to be had.
Exactly. But despair is passive. It's silence. It's the crushing realization that the fight is over, you lost, and there is simply nothing left to say.
Which brings us to the core concept of the chapter, the comfort paradox. This is the thing I've been chewing on all week. He says he couldn't go to God for comfort after Natalie died. Why is that?
Because of the logic of sovereignty. If you believe God is all-powerful, then you inherently believe he has the power to intervene.
Yeah.
He could have healed her. He could have prevented the illness entirely. The fact that she died means he chose not to.
You could have, but you didn't.
That is the exact wall he hit, and he uses this devastating analogy to explain it. Imagine a child has a favorite toy, something they love more than anything in the world, and a parent is standing right there holding a hammer. The parent smashes the toy. Or maybe the parent just watches someone else smash it and refuses to stop them.
God, that's brutal.
And then while the child is just sobbing over the broken pieces, the parent opens their arms and says, "Come here, give me a hug."
That is visceral. I mean, every instinct in that kid is going to be, get away from me.
Exactly. You cannot seek solace from the agent of your suffering. It feels like a massive betrayal. Astoria says, "The spoiled child in me saw my favorite toy destroyed, and the one who could have prevented it didn't." In that moment, God isn't the comforter, he's the withholder.
He talks about trying to pray during that time. And he brings up that famous verse everyone always quotes, "Ask, and you shall receive. Knock, and the door shall be opened." I think we tend to treat that verse like a blank check.
We really do. And Astoria looks at that blank check and basically sees insufficient funds. He writes, "I asked, and I didn't receive. I knocked, and the door stayed shut." It's the sheer experience of the closed door.
I mourned, and I was not comforted. That line just stayed with me. It's so stark.
It is. And this is where the conversation moves from simple grief into incredibly complex theology. Because if you knock and nobody answers, you really only have two options. Option A, there is nobody home, God doesn't exist.
The atheist route.
Right. Or option B, he is home, he hears you crying, and he is actively locking the deadbolt.
And option B is infinitely more terrifying.
It is. And that brings us to C.S. Lewis. You really can't talk about this specific kind of grief without bringing in Lewis. Astoria paraphrases a thought from A Grief Observed, which Lewis wrote right after his own wife died. It's honestly one of the most haunting things I've ever read.
Remind us of the quote.
Lewis writes that the most terrifying thing isn't the thought that God doesn't exist. The real terror comes from believing in him and concluding, so, that's how you are.
So that's how you are.
Let that sink in for a second.
It's awful. It sounds like discovering your best friend is actually a sociopath.
It changes the fundamental nature of the relationship. If God doesn't exist, our suffering is just biology and physics. It's deeply tragic, but it's completely neutral.
Yeah.
But if God exists, and he is supposed to be good, but his version of good involved watching me writhe in agony while he just stays silent, then what does good even mean?
It creates a total crisis of character. You're not doubting his power. You're doubting his goodness.
Right.
You're doubting his safety.
And that is exactly why Astoria couldn't find comfort. You can't rest in the arms of someone you don't trust. He says the nights were spent in total suffocating silence. Not the cries of an angry man, because, again, anger implies you think you can somehow change the outcome.
Right.
He calls himself disconsolate,
But
literally unable to be consoled.
it's so interesting because we started this conversation talking about the spoiled child who was mad about his business deal.
Yeah.
That feels so incredibly trivial now.
Right.
We've moved from a guy mad about a contract dispute to a guy just staring into the void.
It's the absolute deconstruction of his faith. The business loss stripped away his prosperity gospel, that whole idea that God wants him rich and successful.
Yeah.
But the death of his wife stripped away his protection gospel, the idea that God will keep him and his loved ones safe. He is left with absolutely nothing but the silence.
So where does he even go from there? Because if the chapter ends there, this is without a doubt the most depressing deep dive we've ever done.
Well, the chapter actually ends on a cliffhanger. Yeah. He pushes back against the idea that he was just angry or despairing during that dark period. He says, "I assure you, during those times with God, there were tears, there were cries, and there was one other thing."
One other thing.
He doesn't say what it is. He just teases that this third emotion, this thing that isn't anger and isn't despair, is the entire subject of the final chapter. It's the key to how he actually survived the silence.
Man, he really knows how to write a hook. I guess we're going to have to cover the final chapter next time to solve the mystery. But looking back at this chapter we just covered, it really forces a hard look in the mirror.
It really does. It forces you, as the reader, to ask, is my faith, or even just my worldview, entirely dependent on things going right? If the door stays closed, do I still knock?
It's so easy to believe when the sun is shining. It's a lot harder when you're just standing alone in the rain.
And I think there is one final provocation here, going back to that C.S. Lewis idea. We so often frame a crisis of faith as a struggle with atheism, like, is God real? But I think Astoria is arguing that the real struggle is much, much harder than that.
How so?
The question isn't, is God real? The real question is, can I accept a God who is real, but who operates in ways that fundamentally contradict my human desire for safety?
Wow. That's the heavy lifting right there.
It is. Because atheism might make you lonely. You're just the only smart ape in a dying universe. But the alternative makes you feel small. It forces you to accept that you are not the main character, and that the author of the story might write chapters that you absolutely hate.
And that you might not get an explanation until the very end of the book.
Exactly. Or maybe not even then.
Wow. Okay. That is a lot. But it's the kind of lot we really need to think about. We're going to leave it there for this deep dive into Riding the Waves of Grief. We really hope this gave you something to chew on, whether you're currently in a season of open doors or closed ones.
Thank you so much for listening. Keep asking the hard questions.
See you next time.